Charmouth owes its existence to its proximity to the sea and the River Char, from which it gets its name. Although much altered from its original name of Kernmouth, the talk will cover its early history stretching back nearly 2,000 years on the Roman road in the first part, and then as a popular resort in the second part. There will be a half-hour break in the middle for refreshments. This map shows the network of Roman roads in southern England, most of which were centred on London as they do today. In Britain, as in other provinces, the Romans constructed a comprehensive network of paved trunk roads during their 4 centuries of occupation, whose primary function was to allow the rapid movement of troops. Pre-Roman Britons used many unpaved trackways running along elevated ridges of hills. This present-day map shows roughly the 2 main Roman roads near to Charmouth. The Fosse Way marked a diagonal route from Lincoln to a port near Seaton and went through Axminster, roughly paralleling the Cotswolds and then making use of the Axe Valley. The Ackling Dyke is the name generally given for the road that linked Exeter and Salisbury via Dorchester, which was probably built sometime during the period 55 to 60 AD. Those coloured red are for uncertain stretches. The village of Charmouth stood on the Roman Ackling Dyke Road that linked Dorchester with Exeter. A section of this was found in 2006 to the north of Hodchester Farm by the famous archaeologist Bill Putnam. At the time of the Domesday in 1085, Charmouth was a small settlement producing salt by boiling seawater in large metal basins and collecting the residue. Robert of Mortain in Normandy, the half-brother of William the Conqueror, owned the village at that time of the Norman invasion. He is shown on the Baywhite tapestry to the right of William. It was one of 71 manors that he was given, which included Catherston and Wootton Fitzpaine. After his death in 1091, another French nobleman, William de Este, was shown as lord of the manor. By 1170, most of the village lands had been gifted by Richard de la Este to Ford Abbey. We are fortunate that the owners of the abbey today still possess an ancient cartulary which records its early land transactions. The first 64 entries are for Charmouth and provide a wonderful insight to the village. It had a grange, guildhall, mill, market cross, pillory, fair and bridge. It was so successful that in 1290 William the Abbot improved the manor by making it a free borough. The entry is very descriptive of the boundaries and half-acre burgage plots that were created along the street. The virtually unbroken 13th century boundary wall is still there today, parallel to the street, with many of the burgage plots stretching back to it. The 1841 and 1926 maps show clearly the line of it. The abbot had the foresight to create the new centre of the village, a suitable distance for the ever-encroaching shoreline. This was clearly seen in 1281 when Robert Wickhampton, Bishop of Salisbury, wrote to the abbot that he had been informed by many trustworthy men that the chapel of Charmouth, built a long time ago near the sea, has been ruined by the battering of the sea and storms. He gave his authority and assent to the abbot and monks, if Ford, the patrons of the chapel, to move it to their new borough where its successor stands today. Further proof that the original settlement was sited in an area now far out to sea was in 1279 when a wooden bowl, carbon dated to the 12th century, was found during low tide by the Heritage Centre, which is now in the Dorchester Museum. The earlier building was one of several chapels of these to the Mother Church at Whitchurch, Canonicum. It may well have resembled those still standing further along the coast at Stanton St Gabriel's and inland at Wootton Fitzpaine. The abbots of Ford were to own the village for over 400 years until its dissolution in 1539. It established inns for the accommodation of visitors there as an important stop point along the road linking Dorchester and Exeter. The George Inn is the lone survivor of these today. The road would have still been that which was created during the Roman invasion, and no doubt in an awful state after all that time, and have only been suitable for pack horses and heavy wagons. An important innovation in 1737 was the running of wagons continuously day and night, with horses and wagoner changing regularly. This faster service became known as the flying wagons. The road speeds of the service was no faster, but the time from Exeter to London was reduced by Russell's from 7 days to 4.5 days. In 1739, the local newspaper recorded, "Our townsmen beheld by only going to Charmouth the wonder of the day, better known as the Exeter flying stagecoach, which reached Dorchester from London in 2 days and reached Exeter in 3 days. The lofty Stoneborough Hill had to be ascended from Morecambe, and the descent a perilous one to be made by the main road, better called Narrow Lane, beyond the Eastern Brook by Charmouth." In 1757, there is a description of the existing road as that high road leading from the almshouses at the west end of Charmouth to and through Lyme Regis, which are in a ruinous condition, narrow in many places and very steep and uneven, and by reason of the waters in the winter season impassable at divers places and very dangerous to travellers, cannot be repaired, widened by present methods. As a result, the following year Charmouth had the first of its turnpike roads built. It was known as the Great Western Road and continued on as far as Owlsbere, within a few miles of Exeter. It started from the top of the street where Claremont is today. There would have been a toll gate, which was generally stout and substantial, with a keeper as depicted here. A turnpike was a gate set across a new or improved road, which had only opened when a toll had been paid to the turnpike keeper. This improved road was to transform the village with its fast links to London. A number of new houses were built soon after. Towards the end of the century, Charmouth, with its neighbour Lyme Regis, was to be very fashionable and was written about in flattering terms. When properties were advertised for sale, the fact that it was on the Great Western Road and near to the beach were always referred to. The watercolour shown here is dated 1794 and is a pennon just outside Charmouth, and gives us an idea of how the roads and countryside around the village would have appeared at the end of the 18th century. Although the village began to cater for visitors with its inns and lodging houses, the majority of its citizens were employed in the fields, mainly growing flax. This was used in the manufacture of sailcloth in 3 factories established at that time, which were booming with their use on the ships being built during the long conflict with France. It was Bernard's by the mill, Kit's in the centre at the corner of Bars Lane, and Webber's at the top of the village. Main Inn was the Coach and Horses, which stood next to the church in the centre of the village. It originally called the 3 Crowns. It later changed its name to the Mail Coach Inn, and then eventually the Coach and Horses. One of its tenants was Josiah Bradbeer, who established a post office there, which he moved across the street in 1807 and opened a grocer's shop, which is still going strong today under the nicer banner. In 1783, most of the village lands came up for auction on the 17th of June of that year. It was described as the valuable and improbable manor of Charmouth, truly eligible, situated in midway between Bridport and Axminster on the Great Western Road and 1.5 miles from Lyme, a place bequeathed with its healthy situation and convenience for bathing. It was bought by Lieutenant James Walden, who was later to build Langmore Manor at the edge of the village. He was very argumentative and fell out with the villagers and the rector, Brian Combe, for removing stone, sand and pebbles from his beach. He took them to court and won his case, where it must have been very difficult to enforce. He was later to fall out with his neighbour, Norman Bond, over his dog, which culminated in a duel in 1792, in which he lost his life. It was his daughter, Anne Liddon, who was to inherit the estate. A watercolour of Langmore Manor and a young Anne are shown here with an advert in 1811, which provides an insight into the coast at that time, which was owned by her. It reads, "To be let for a term of 10 years from Lady Day next, all that overland called Seaside Farm, situated in the parish of Charmouth in the county of Dorset, containing by estimation 40 acres of exceedingly rich pasture and arable land, and between 30 and 40 acres of rough land, called the Cliff, bounding the said farm on the seaside. There is a lime kiln on the estate, and a sufficient quantity of excellent limestone may be taken from the beach for manuring the premises, and independent of this, the seaweed annually thrown on the beach, and to which the tenant has the exclusive right, is more than sufficient to manure the whole estate. the tenant to pay all the taxes except the landlord's property tax and to keep the premises in repair. Tenders are to be made in writing and be delivered or sent post-paid to John Harvey Pierce, Esquire, New Park, near Axminster, or to Messrs. Flood and Muir Solicitors, Honiton, on or before the 24th day of September instant, and immediately after which the person approved of will have notice that his offer is accepted. For viewing the premises, apply to Mrs. Liddon in Charmouth aforesaid, the owner, who will direct a person to show the same, and further particulars may be known on application to the above named John Harvey Pierce, Esquire, or Messrs. Flood and Muir, Honiton, September the 9th, 1811. This watercolour is by Carter Galpin of the Charmouth Beach, looking towards Charmouth. The poster, which would have been pinned to a board there, makes interesting reading today in light of the many rockfalls. Whereas diverse persons having been concerned in unlawfully ripping, forcing out and carrying away the stone from the base of the cliff on the beach within this manner, whereby considerable breaches or slips have been occasioned to the great detriment of the land above and the manifest injury of the owner thereof. Notice is hereby given that any person or persons who shall or may find trespassing thereon after this public caution will be prosecuted with the utmost rigour of the law, and any person giving information of such trespass and verifying the same on earth shall be handsomely rewarded. The public are likewise informed that no person is justified in carrying away the loose stones on the beach without consent of the lady of the manor, and that any person so doing after this public notice will be prosecuted. Flood and Muir, stewards of the said manor, November 15th, 1822. This must have been very difficult to enforce, and there are a number of trials over the years by the lords of the manor to prosecute those who remove stones from the beach, all with little success. There was a lime kiln on the estate where limestone could be taken from the beach and burnt for use as a cement or manure to improve fields. This watercolour of 1827 is by the Charmouth artist Carter Galpin, which clearly shows the lime kiln in that year, the remains of which are still to be seen today at the back of the Heritage Centre. Many Dorset villages, hamlets, private estates and farms once had their own lime kilns to produce lime for building mortar and especially for agricultural improvement. Limestone and chalk were loaded as fist-sized lumps into the kiln pot from the top of the bank. Alternate layers of stone and fuel, which was wood, gorse or coal, were loaded. Gaps between the stones allowed the even distribution of heat and the escape of carbon dioxide. As the burning proceeded, the lime would crumble and collapse and be extracted through the draw holes at the bottom. This would allow the further addition of limestone and fuel in an extended batch process, which might last several days. The small hut in the middle of the picture is where a chap would have to wait whilst all this happened. The bathing machine, including the painting, is one of the earliest examples. This is another of the many watercolours produced by Carter Galpin with a view towards Golden Cap, with wagons collecting seaweed and stone. No doubt the same views today would be without much of the cliff, which has been lost to erosion. This aquatint of Lyme Regis from Charmouth Beach is by William Daniel, and it's from his Voyages round Great Britain, which was published in 1814. The footpath shown on the right ran along the edge of the cliffs for the whole distance between Lyme and Charmouth. With its closeness to Lyme Regis, it was also able to benefit from the boom in visitors taking the waters for their health, and had its own bathing machines, which were very popular as a way of bathing in the sea without being seen. Wagons called bathing machines would be drawn into the water by sturdy women who might then assist the bathers down into the water, where you could paddle about or swim in relative privacy, shielded from the view of the shore. An advert in the Western Gazette from 1799 shown here records this advantage. Sea bathing, Charmouth, Dorset, to be let, a large, handsome, modern-built brick house, genteelly furnished, having a view of the sea, with a very good garden, well cropped, and a stable, and may be taken immediately for 4 or 6 months, or by the year. The situation of Charmouth is remarkably cheerful and healthy. It lies on the Great Western Road, is well supplied, and has excellent machines for sea bathing. For particulars, apply post-paid to John Dimmant, Charmouth. Now, John was a baker living in a house where Devon Edge stands today. This engraving of Lyme Regis is based on a sketch by Captain Frederick Marriott, who has a number of links with Charmouth, and his sister owned Fern Hill, and a daughter, Caroline, married the local GP, Dr. George Norris, and lived at the Elms. He was very famous as the author of The Children of the New Forest and many other novels. It shows the seafront, the assembly rooms, and the corner of Bell Cliff with a rather fanciful view of the bathing machines and the bathers. The famous author Jane Austen was to stay at the Coach of Horses in 1803. She was very impressed with what she saw, and later in the novel Persuasion described it as Charmouth, with its high grounds and extensive sweeps of country, and still more its sweet, retired bay backed by dark cliffs, where fragments of low rock among the sands make it the happiest spot for watching the flow of the tide, for sitting in an unwearied contemplation. Later, Jane in chapter 14 again refers to this pleasure enjoyed by visitors as follows. Mary had been taken to Charmouth too, and she had bathed, and she had gone to church, and there was a great many more people to look at the church at Lyme than at Uppercross, and all this, joined to the sense of being so very useful, had made really an agreeable fortnight. When she herself visited Lyme in 1804, she mentioned Charmouth in a letter to her sister Cassandra. The bathing was so delightful this morning, and Molly so pressing with me to enjoy myself, that I believe I stayed in rather too long. As since the middle of the day I felt unreasonably tired. I shall be more careful another time, and shall not bathe tomorrow as I had before intended. Jenny and James are walking to Charmouth this afternoon. John Feltham published his first authoritative book on the subject with his guide to all the watering and sea bathing places in 1803. It was produced annually until 1825 and would have been used by Jane and her family before visiting here. He floridly writes about Charmouth as follows. This delightful village lies between Bridport and Axminster on one of the roads leading to Exeter, and is 31 miles from that city. It occupies an elevated situation and consequently commands many vast and beautiful prospects, both of the sea and the land. It has likewise the advantage of being a considerable thoroughfare, and lying so near Lyme, it is much resorted to by bathers. The beach here is pebbly, and in advantages and disadvantages partakes of the qualities of its neighbour and rival. It cannot be expected that fashionable amusements are to be found here, but the lower nature will be sure to find gratification in his rambles of the environs, and he who is in search of health is still superior good will be as likely to find it on the coast of Dorset as those in Sussex. The fisheries here and at Lyme present a constant scene of useful activity, no less advantageous to the individual concerned than amusing to spectators. The rides and walks are sufficiently varied and numerous. Bridport, Axminster, Axmouth, etc. will be included amongst the former. Sailing too, whether it's regarded as a pleasant or a healthful exercise, cannot be excelled by any of the circle of the occupations of the idle, may here be enjoyed to the full with facilities that render it still more inviting. This map from the guidebook would have been the equivalent to Google Maps at the time, providing the tourist with all the information needed before his trip. It was a popular form of publication, listing over 60 places in England and Wales, which have become fashionable either for their spas or sea bathing facilities, sometimes both. The route from London called at Andover, Salisbury, Woodyates Inn, Blandford, Dorchester, Bridport, and finally Charmouth. To reach Exeter, the coach would stop at Axminster and then Honiton before reaching that destination. The Tate Gallery has a copy of this guidebook that J.M.W. Turner used when he travelled to Charmouth and the surrounding area in 1811. Britain's greatest artist, J.M.W. Turner, visited Charmouth in 1811 and painted this beautiful view of a squall looking towards Lyme Regis, which now hangs in the Kevin Grove Gallery in Glasgow. There are 3 drawings in his Devonshire Coast No. 1 sketchbook at the Tate Gallery, which records the village of that year. The watercolour was later used for an engraving in the book Picturesque Views of the Southern Coast of England. The earliest directory for Charmouth, dating back to 1811, is by John Holden and is surprisingly accurate and gives us an insight into both the inhabitants and their occupation. It describes the principal manufacturer as sailcloth, with the three main producers, Bernard, Ridley Kitts and Weber, highlighted. It was already attracting the well-off members of society who were described as gentlemen. The most exciting entry is that for Charmouth entrepreneur Joseph Bradbeer, who was at that time operating both the newly opened post office, which is nicer today, and the Mail Coach Inn, where Jane Austen would have stayed. The directory entry highlights the fact that Russell and Sweet were operating wagons and stagecoaches daily from Charmouth. We still have a reminder of these early years with the Lookout, which was built by the Customs and Excise Service in 1804, at a time when England took the threat of a Napoleonic invasion very seriously. The southeast coast were the ones thought to be most at risk from a sally by the French from their great port at Boulogne. But in addition to the redoubling of vigilance at the St. Ports, preparations were made all the way along the south and southwest coast. An observation and warning system of lookout and signal posts was established at prominent points along the shoreline, together with beacons on the highest hills inland, all designed to enable invasion warnings to be flashed across the country with great speed and urgency. The invasion, however, never came. Smuggling had for some time been rife along this coastline, and during the first half of the 19th century, the lookout was used very effectively by the Excise and Coast Guard Service in their endeavours to intercept the running of brandy from France and to apprehend the smugglers. There is still a sunken lane running inland from the eastern cliffs of Charmouth, which retains its early name of the Smuggler's Path. The problem of smuggling, both in Charmouth and along the coast, is clearly shown in January 1825, when the Western Flying Post reported the following. On the night of Saturday week, 3 men of the Line Preventative Station were on the lookout near the mouth of the Charmouth River, where they captured 150 kegs and 2 men. They had not retained possession long before they were attacked by a party of smugglers, 70 or 80 in number, and as is usual in such adventures, they appeared affected by liquor. They advanced with great violence. In defence, the officers were compelled to fire in the midst of them, in consequence of which one man fell and was carried off by the party, who immediately retreated, carrying with them all but 10 kegs and the 2 prisoners. One of the officers, named Davis, was mistaken for his brother, an extremely active man stationed near Bridport, and nothing short of murder was intended towards him, as an attempt was made to cut his throat, which did not take effect, as the stock of his cravat prevented the weapon from making any serious incision. The smugglers continued to discharge large stones from the cliff upon the revenue men, who, though they were preserved by the darkness of the night from destruction, received some severe confusions and are now confined in consequence. They left behind 3 of their number, who subsequently served 3 months in Dorchester Gaol. The Register of Dorset Gaol records similar imprisonment of Charmouth smugglers, which include 21-year-old Elizabeth Powell in 1824 and a 49-year-old seaman, Henry Tippins, in 1828. In 1824, there was another landmark in the involution of the village with a new and improved section of road, which was opened by the Bridport Turnpike Trust. This new route around Golden Cap at a lower level allowed for an easier journey, avoiding the steep hill. A house was built to collect the tolls near the bridge at the bottom of the village, which still stands. This early drawing of the village shows the new turnpike road travelling through the village past the toll house. A cutting which can be seen in the distance was made in constructing the line to Charmouth Road in 1824 and was known as the Devil's Bellows, from the force from which the wind rushed through and was known to blow over horse and trap. Another steep hill was avoided when the Charmouth Tunnel was opened in 1832. It was so novel that over 1,200 people were at its opening, and sumptuous dinners were provided at the Mail Coach and the George Inns afterwards. Charmouth's new prosperity was reflected in the large number of fine houses and villas that were built at the beginning of the 19th century. Many of these were let out for lodgings in the summer season. To record these changes, Charmouth had its very own artist, Carter Gilpin, who was living in the premises next to where Narcissa is today. Some of his illustrations have survived and are shown in the following slides. This picture of the Cobb was published in 1825 by Carter Gilpin. On extreme light will be seen a vessel on the stocks in the shipbuilding yard, the figure in the foreground with a face to the sea and a geological hammer in hand is probably intended to be Mary Anning. Carter Galpin depicted the wreck of the Unity of Charmouth in the new process of drawing in black lead which he advertised, and for which he received the Silver Medal of the Society of Arts in 1826. The Unity was driven out of Lyme Cobb on the day of the Great Storm of 1824. The crew, lashed to the shrouds, were saved. Captain C.C. Bella, R.N. of Lyme Regis, organised the rescue party and received from King George IV the Gold Medal of the National Institution for the Preservation of Life from Shipwrecks. Out of this institution, the RNLI started the following year. The Unity was refitted at the Lyme shipyard and relaunched in 1825. The Western Gazette of the 6th of February 1840 reported that on the 5th of February 1840 a large mass was observed by the Coast Guard floating towards the Charmouth Beach. They thought it was originally the hull of a wreck, but in grounding it was perceived to be a large fish. The preventative men got a rope round it and after an hour it died. It soon attracted a crowd of inhabitants, as there were danger of it being carried off by the next tide. The Lord Paramount of the manor, John Bullen, to whom as adrift from the sea it belonged, directed that it be cut into 5 parts. This was achieved by a large handsaw with great labour. After 3 days it was removed into the village and exhibited as a curiosity to visitors from all parts of the country for a week. The money raised of between £20 and £30 was given to the preventative men and others who assisted. The extreme length was 44 feet and the girth of the widest 21 feet. After being exhibited, it was bought by a villager. He took the lean off for manure and the fat converted into oil. The bones were then buried in lime and cleaned. The owner then fixed the skeleton and placed it under a long shed for exhibition to the curious. This is a view towards Golden Cap painted in 1850 by a local amateur artist, and it shows the tranquil beach with its fishing boats moored on the sands. This is the companion painting to the former, and this time is looking towards Lyme Regis with the preventative station and flagstaff below. This engraving shows Charmouth in 1850. Although the street had a large number of houses along its length, the area between it and the beach was sparsely populated. These have been marked on this slide. A higher sea lane did not exist at that time apart from Charmouth House on the corner of the street and Seahall's House built in 1803 near its entrance. This early photograph shows the Coach and Horses in 1860 when it was owned by George Holly. During the golden age of coaching, so vividly depicted by Dickens in the Pickwick Papers, our village inn could so well have been the model for that chosen by him. This period of history coincided with the introduction of the Royal Mail at the end of the 18th century and was to quickly decline with the growth of the railway. The inn's history is entwined with this and for a while was actually renamed the Mail Coach Inn. There was a disastrous fire in 1895 which destroyed the earlier thatch building and was rebuilt in brick. It continued as a hotel till 1996 after many centuries on the site and is now divided into apartments. This photograph is very early and was taken by local schoolmaster Mr. Bottomley. It depicts the last day of the Coronet coach service in 1860 outside the Coach and Horses Inn. It ran between Bridport and Exeter from February 1858 till the summer of 1860, when the opening of the LSW railway to Exeter brought the service to an abrupt end. The London Evening Standard in October of 1853 reported the following: Charmouth, that part of Charmouth cliffs and lands adjoining belonging to Mr. Liddon, Esquire, lying between the Sea Lane and Lyme, has lately been purchased by a company of Plymouth gentlemen. The cliffs abound with large quantities of stone, which when burnt produce an excellent cement of the Roman kind. We understand that kilns will be immediately built for calcination. The estate was bought by George Freen at age 61 and his son George Henderson Freen, who originated from Plymouth, for £6,500. The family had prospered and George Senior was shown as mayor of the town at one time. They were described as corn merchants and operated a number of mills in the Plymouth neighbourhood. George had formed the Plymouth and Dartmoor Gunpowder Company near Postbridge, Dartmoor. The gunpowder was in great demand for both quarrying and for farmers clearing rock from their land. Soon after purchasing the Charmouth estate from Matthew Liddon, he sold Langmore Manor to Anne Farley Molly for £3,400 and a parcel of fields to John Wilcox for £2,000. His name rarely appears in the records of Charmouth, for he continued to reside in Plymouth. It was his son, George Henderson Freen, who was to later go on and found the famous biscuit firm, Peak Freen. The entrepreneur George Freen's main focus was the setting up of a cement works near the existing lime kilns by the mouth of the River Char and the sea. His sister, Anna Freen, had married Michael Morecambe, described as a merchant of Plymouth in 1836. They were to have 10 children, one of whom, George Freen Morecambe, was to later reside in Los Angeles and become world famous as an ornithologist. But in 1851, the family were living at St Agnes in Cornwall, and Michael is described as a mine agent. No doubt with a background in quarrying, the Morecambes could be ideal for running a cement factory for George. By January 7, 1853, the building we see today had been finished by the local builders, Priors, and a later auction catalogue reveals that Mr Morecambe of Plymouth had a 21-year lease and was paying £100 a year rent for a cement mill. A stone and slated building with 2 floors, lean-to and 2 kilns. This early watercolour by a local amateur artist depicts the back of the cement works and the nearby lookout in the corner of the picture. The factory was built for grinding the limestones found on the beach for the manufacture of cement. It consisted of a large room facing east and double doors and a small office just inside on the left. Opposite the entrance was a doorway leading into the engine room and to the boiler room. The engine was a small beam engine with a large flywheel, by the side of which was another door leading to a room containing machinery which is now used for storing deck chairs in winter. There were 2 other compartments, probably storerooms, one with a door by the side of that leading to the engine room and the other with an entrance from the yard outside on the west side. Opposite this door and built into the west cliff were 2 lime kilns. The boiler room had a tall chimney which for many years was a very useful guide for fishermen for locating their fishing grounds. There were no doors or windows facing the sea. The 2 storerooms are now part of the beach cafe. The upper floor was reached by outside stone steps in the northwest corner, since demolished, and by an inside wooden ladder. The machinery was mounted on firm foundations probably used for grinding. The stones were brought to the kilns by horse and cart, and smaller stones known as washers were collected by women. George Freen also operated a cement works in Lyme Regis, which proved much more successful, which may well have contributed to his decision to sell his estate to John Hawkshaw on January 1, 1864 for £6,000. This was precisely 10 years from the day he had bought his property in Charmouth from the Liddons and would have shown him a good profit. John Hawkshaw's master plan in coming to Charmouth was to build a railway, become an MP and reside in a fine country house. He was to almost achieve all these ambitions between 1864 and 1865. In buying up large estates, houses and land in both Lyme Regis and Charmouth, he had a base to work from and was quick to win his voters over in a number of ways, as well as the promise of the prosperity from the railway would offer. He gave coal to the poor, treated his tenants well, built his own expensive water supply and many other incentives for their votes. Bridport already had its station, opened in 1857, and its neighbours were anxious to have theirs as well. In July 1864, the local paper was to report Hawkshaw's activities as follows. Railway accommodation being very much needed at Charmouth and Lyme Regis, a company has been formed for the purpose of constructing a line from Chard Road to Lyme Regis with a branch to Charmouth from Pen Inn. A meeting for the purpose of discussing the matter was held on Wednesday evening, the 13th instant, at Lyme Regis. F. Hinton, Esquire, Mayor, in the chair, with a large number of gentlemen, tradesmen, etc., of Lyme and Charmouth were present. And on the following evening, another meeting took place at Charmouth. Mr. Morecambe of Charmouth occupying the chair. Several gentlemen and tradesmen were present, and practical speeches were made. And there is a fair probability of the railway being constructed, as a portion of the intended line has been surveyed, and there is every reason to believe it is bona fide affair, as the promoters, as well as inhabitants of both Charmouth and Lyme, see the great necessity of a railway, and further there is prospect of paying the shareholders a fair, if not good, dividend. It's interesting to see that both Morecambe and Hinton were both favourable to the project, as they each rented their properties from Hawkshaw. Sadly, it was thrown out by the government after lobbying from the Great Western Railway, and in 1867 there was a massive auction of all the holdings in Lyme Regis and Charmouth, including the foreshore and its lands. The coastal lands shown on the map did not sell and were later bought by John Coulton. To give you an idea of how extensive Hawkshaw purchases were, in 1864 we show this map with most of Charmouth shown in pink and green that was his. Many of you, no doubt, have houses that were on fields that once belonged to him. The large pink group of fields at the top is Lily Farm that he bought with the blacksmiths and a number of cottages in the same year from Colonel William Pinney, who had purchased them in 1850. The 1867 map that went with the auction catalogue is interesting when placed alongside those of the lands fronting the beach, as each clearly shows the wide oxbow bend in the river alongside where the Heritage Centre is today. The 1783 map was originally part of a much larger estate map that has not come down to us, apart from the reference book that went with it. When the manor was sold in that year, the fields to the east of the river were bought by the Reverend Brian Coombs. By 1841, they formed part of a farm based at Newlands, and a lime kiln is shown on the map. This was advertised 2 years later when it came up to be let. It was later bought by the wealthy Mrs. Stewart, who lived at the court and also owned Backlands Farm in the village. John Clark Hawkshaw, immediately after getting his degree at Cambridge, joined his father's practice in London and worked with him on many important projects. In the same year, as he stood for election in Charmouth and Lyme Regis, he married Cicely Wedgwood, daughter of Francis Wedgwood, grandson of Josiah Wedgwood, founder of the famous pottery firm. Francis' sister, Emma Wedgwood, married her cousin, Charles Darwin. This famous family connection and the close proximity to the Jurassic coast must have fostered his love of collecting fossils. His fine collection still exists and is on display in its original cabinet at Hazelmere Museum in Surrey and contains a fine ichthyosaur from Charmouth. The items were donated by his son, Colonel Oliver Hawkshaw, in 1922. Three of the items in the collection are shown here. Edward Cecil Harsneck Day attended the new Royal School of Mines in London and took up a geological career. To advance this, he in 1861 moved to live in Charmouth, one of the most geological locations in England. His name appears on the jury list for the village during his time here and is described as a gentleman. The Charmouth Cricket Club was founded in 1863 and he was one of the founders and their treasurer. He was elected Fellow of the Geological Society in the same year and published an important paper on the Middle and Upper Lias on the Dorset coast. In this he identified a new shell bed in the Middle Lias, which is now named Day's Shell Bed after him. The Amanat Dicaris was also named after him by L.F. Smith, following a suggestion from W.D. Lang to commemorate his important work on the Lias at Charmouth. In 1864, Day purchased one of the most perfect plesiosauri ever found on the Dorsetshire coast for £40 from the local dealer Samuel Clark of Charmouth, shown here on the left. He was also assisted by young Isaac Taylor on the right in locating suitable examples for his collection. The illustration shown above is from Owens, a monograph of the fossil reptilia of the Liassic formations, published in 1863. The most remarkable feature of the discovery was that in 1864, Day sold it to the British Museum for £200, a fortune at that time. The Plesiosaurus can still be seen in the showcase on the wall of the Natural History Museum, London, and is illustrated here. Day was highly active as a geologist whilst he was in Charmouth. He helped Huxley with his researches on belemnites. In 1865, he revealed the true situation of the cephalic spines in the fossil shark Hypodos anningi, and in 1867, he acquired from Isaac Hunter of Charmouth a second new species of Plesiosaurus, which Richard Owen was to have called Plesiosaurus lachyteps. Day left Charmouth for America in 1867 and was essay master of the Columbia College School of Mining. He then became in 1872 Professor of Natural Science at the Normal College, New York, where he was also active as a botanist. He died on 4th of January 1895 in Algiers whilst on tour in an attempt to recover his health. The Morning Post reported on the 23rd of November 1924 that a person named Jonas Wishcombe, a short time since, found between Charmouth and Lyme Regis under a ledge of blue lias in a slaty substance a beautiful petrified fish. Jonas Wishcombe discovered many important fossils at the beginning of the 19th century. He rented Waterloo House, which is coincidentally a fossil shop today. He is listed as a fossilist in the 1830s Pigott Directory and worked with many of the famous collectors of the day. In 1832, he assisted Thomas Hawkins dig out one of the largest ichthyosaurus, which was sold for £210 to the Natural History Museum, where it can still be seen. In 1833, Hawkins obtained another ichthyosaurus between Lyme and Charmouth. A claim had already been staked on this skeleton by Wishcombe, which was bought out by Hawkins. At low tide one day, Hawkins with volunteer helpers, including the minister Benjamin Jeans, managed to extract the specimen complete. The display in the Natural History Museum today of the ichthyosaurus has a large number that were found in Charmouth. During the 1850s, James Harrison found fossils from the cliffs of Black Fen between Charmouth and Lyme Regis that were quarried for raw materials for the manufacture of cement in the cement works owned by George Freen and operated by his son-in-law Michael Morecambe. Some of these he gave to a collector and retired general surgeon Henry Norris, who lived at the Elms. In September 1855, James Harrison moved to 3 Hillside in Charmouth, where he lived until his death in 1864. He is best known today as the discoverer of the earliest British dinosaur, which was named after him by Sir Richard Owen, Scelidoreus harrisoni. This was a plant-eating armoured dinosaur which was alive in the lower Jurassic around 195 million years ago. It has only been found here at Charmouth and nowhere else in the world. Since then, around 8 partial dinosaurs have been discovered, a mix of both adults and juveniles. The most complete specimen was found by local fossil collector David Soul in 2000. The 1867 auction of the properties that John Hawkshaw had bought in anticipation of the railways proceeding ahead between Lyme Regis and Bridport via Charmouth left a number of unsold lots. These included the cement factory and 64 acres of the surrounding fields and foreshore. These were eventually sold to John James Coulton, a King's Lynn solicitor. A copy of his receipt for the £3,140 he paid in 1870 is shown here. It was to see little return for his purchase apart from the title of Lord of the Manor of Charmouth. In the same year as the sale, he gave a 7-year lease to local fisherman Robert Hunter at a yearly rent of just 6pence for a licence to operate 2 bathing machines on the beach. The original indenture is shown on the right. This was to be the start of the rise of the Hunter family, who were to be involved with many activities on the beach. John James Coulton was to be Lord of the Manor of Charmouth for almost 40 years, and yet there are few records concerning him or reasons for him owning the estate. The parish records for 1896 show him bringing an action for taking stones from his beach.